All right, welcome everyone to our second session of our virtual Sacramento legislative tour. As you all know, we would rather be up in Sacramento or rather have been in Sacramento by now, but unfortunately due to the circumstances, we're unable to be there. So we're gonna move along, as I said, because we have 4 speakers that we're gonna squeeze into an hour today. So with no ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our president for this year, Ms. Lindsay Horvath.
Thank you so much, Marcel. I want to thank you and your team for making this legislative tour virtually possible and accessible for everyone. I want to thank our legislative chair, Cecilia, for her leadership in making all of this happen as well. Special shout out to Jorge Morales, who has recently joined the team and helped round out our experience. Thanks to the board and everyone who works in contract cities to serve everyone, and thank you all for participating. That's what makes our work possible. We have an exciting lineup. I'm eager to hear from everyone, so I won't keep you from them any longer. Thank you to all of our speakers who joined us, and we look forward to working with you in the days and weeks ahead for the mutual benefit of our residents.
All right, everyone. Marcel, assuming it's fine that we move on. I know, as we're all saying, we're on a tight schedule because we're lucky enough to have 4 special speakers with us today. I think I'll move right into it. If you have any questions through the program today, just go ahead and type them into the chat. We may not get to any of them, but in the event that we do, we want to have them there to be able to ask our assembly members. If we don't get to your questions, don't worry. Marcel has said that he will make sure that you get answers from the assembly member after the meeting. But now it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, former mayor and council member from the city of Glendale, my hometown, in fact, Assemblymember Laura Friedman. Assemblymember Friedman was elected to the California Assembly in November of 2016 to represent the 43rd District, which includes Burbank, Glendale, La Cañada, Flint Ridge, parts of Los Angeles, and unincorporated LA County. Entering her 5th year in the legislature, Assemblymember Friedman has been tapped for several leadership roles in the legislature, including chair of the Assembly Natural Resources Committee, assistant speaker pro tem, chair of the Assembly Select Committee on Small Businesses and Entrepreneurship, and the chair of the Joint Rules Subcommittee on Sexual Harassment Prevention and Response. Most recently, she was appointed as the chair of the powerful Assembly Transportation Committee by Speaker Rendon. The Assembly member's legislative work is focused in 3 primary areas: addressing the housing affordability and homelessness crisis, combating climate change, and protecting vulnerable communities. A couple fun facts about the Assembly member: she has extensive experience as a producer in the entertainment industry, where she worked on numerous successful films and TV projects. She also taught producing at UCLA and Chapman College. And for 20 years, she's owned and run a small business specializing in vintage jewelry and fine and decorative arts. Please give a warm virtual welcome to a mom, a wife, environmental champion, proud owner of a shelter dog and 2 rescue cats, Assemblymember Friedman. The floor is yours.
Hi, it's really great to be here. And just so that I know, how long did you want me to present, and then how long to leave for Q&A?
If you could present for about 10 minutes, we may have time for 1 question, 7 to 10 minutes.
Thanks. Well, I really appreciate your inviting me to be with you here today. I was a council member for almost 8 years in Glendale. I was also the chair for a year of the Independent Cities Association, which worked very closely with contract cities. So I know how important your organization is, how important it is to make sure that the cities have a unified voice to lobby and voice their concerns and their needs to Sacramento and elsewhere. And I also know how hard you all work for your constituents with little to show for it in terms of financial reimbursement. And certainly, you know, you are the ones who are the front lines. And I know that when you go to the grocery store or walk around your communities, that you're the ones that take the brunt of people's dissatisfaction with everything that's going on, which right now with the COVID crisis is, you know, profound, with so many of our residents being in crisis, being out of work, being sick, being scared. So I thank you for all the work that you do every day for the people of California. So I was recently tasked with chairing the Transportation Committee and want to give you an update about that in a minute. But I thought that I would also give you a little glimpse of what life was like for legislators for the last year with the COVID crisis unfolding across the state. So we came into the legislature last year in November and starting session in January, having really no idea of what was about to hit. In March, when COVID really hit California and a lot of our cities started going into lockdown, we went into recess for a number of weeks so that we could figure out how to keep the legislators and the staff particularly safe and the public safe during the crisis. So it took us a while to figure out how to put those sorts of precautions into effect so that the public continue to have a hand in voicing their concerns to legislators as we met through committees, so that we could still meet in committees safely to hear about all of the different bills and to debate policy, and so that we could try to keep our staff safe. And that took a while to do. And the result of that was that our whole legislative session was pushed back. We were asked to pare our bills down. So what had started out being a year where I was introducing maybe 30 bills, I ended up introducing, I believe, 8 bills, 4 of which went to the governor and 3 of which were signed into law. We were also asked to focus our legislation on either COVID-related bills or bills that were so high priority that they just couldn't wait. And I also felt that we should probably not be hearing bills that could wait and were also extremely controversial, because it was difficult for people to weigh in. And I think all of you probably felt the effects in your cities with some of your legislative departments focused elsewhere, not able to fully concentrate on what was happening in Sacramento. And the same with all of you. You were struggling to figure out how to have your meetings safely, what you were legally allowed to do under the law with Brown Act and everything else, and how to have public input and public involvement in your work. So we all had a lot of the same struggles. And then just trying to keep up with what was happening with COVID, with sometimes conflicting information, with health departments across the state grappling with how to regulate businesses and keep things safe. And they're still going through a lot of that right now. So we heard a lot less bills. In my Natural Resources Committee, we had about 130 bills referred to our committee. And in the end, we heard maybe 16 of them, just to give you an idea. So we took our responsibility to pare down bills very seriously, and people still were able to have public input into the process as we had committees going forward. So the bills that I was able to send to the governor, AB 276 started out as a very different bill and morphed into a bill to conform CARES Act tax conformity, so that people who borrowed from their 401ks to deal with COVID impacts didn't have to pay a tax penalty as they did beforehand in California. This is a bill that passed with no opposition and was signed by the governor. AB 1979 was a bill that we introduced to build on some of our last work, looking at foster youth and trying to have a better path forward for foster youth, who are some of our most disadvantaged community members, who are disproportionately represented in our prison population and in our homeless population. So this bill helped foster youth navigate housing choices as they emancipate out of our system. And that bill was also signed by the governor. AB 3074 was a bill that I worked on actually for a couple of years on wildfire prevention that helps to have cities understand how to set up ember resistant zones within their high fire severity areas based on our most current science and experiences with fire behavior in California, and the realization that most structures are lost by embers that are able to intrude into the houses or come right up against the house, and how important it is for residents to have a 0 to 5 foot ember resistant zone, as well as have home hardening so that their houses don't burn from the inside out, as so many houses in wildfires do. So that was work that we've been doing with UC Davis and CAL FIRE for a couple of years now, and it was signed into law by the governor. So very happy to see that happen, as I represent one city that's 100% in a high fire severity zone, and a lot of other cities that are really seeing their wildfire risk increasing. And that's something that all of you might want to take a look at, so to make sure that your local ordinances reflect what the state is trying to accomplish with defensible space. And the last bill, 3164, that we sent to the governor was vetoed on the very last day of session, with the governor saying that he really thought long and hard about it, but wants to continue to work with us. And this was a bill that looks at the wildland urban interface wildfire risk models to update the risk modeling and have new guidelines so that cities can work on defensible space and then have that reflected in their wildfire risk models so that they can bring insurance costs down for their residents, but also do work that's really meaningful in reducing their wildfire risk. So this was vetoed really for cost reasons, because it does require more frequent updating of wildfire hazard maps. But I believe it's money well spent, because a lot of cities don't really understand where their hazards are, given climate change and drought. Those risk areas are changing, and areas that might not have been high risks in the past are becoming high risks. And if you don't know that, you can't defend against wildfire. So that's work that we're going to continue to do, and we have a bill that we're introducing now to deal with that. Going into next year. Now, in terms of, and then there's a whole bunch of bills that I was a primary co-author on that I'm happy to talk about. Bills like SB 54 and AB 1080, which were bills looking at our single-use plastics and plastics problem across the state and trying to create a more circular economy where we don't have so much plastics going into the waste stream. Something that I know all of you are dealing with in terms of the crisis in recycling, and your residents are probably realizing that they're paying a lot for all that plastic that they're putting into their blue bin that's not being recycled right now. So it's something that I'm going to continue to work with going into next year, and we already are working on more plastics bills. I'm happy to talk about other bills that we didn't move forward last year, but for next year, my top priorities are going to be dealing with the COVID impacts on our economy and on vulnerable communities. And this is, by the way, not just my priorities, but I think the priorities that you'll see from the legislature. Continuing to work on housing production and homelessness, transportation and sustainable communities is something that I really want to focus now my committee on. And again, wildfire risk, recycling and plastics, and continuing to work on climate change with building decarbonization work. I've introduced one bill so far this year, a very well named AB 43, which tells you its priority, my priority list. This is a bill that looks at the 85th percentile, which many of you are very familiar with, which is the rule that governs how you're able to set or not set speed limits in your own communities. The goal here is to give you more leeway when you're doing your traffic surveys to either cap speed limits or lower them in many cases to better reflect the dangers on your roads and to particularly vulnerable populations in your communities. So that is the culmination of a couple years of work that I've put in along with many stakeholders from across the state, looking at how we can combat our traffic safety issues across the state of California. So we'll be looking at road engineering, road manuals, speed limits, and everything that combines to make our roads less safe. And that is AB 43. And an interesting factoid is that during COVID, people have been driving a lot less than they have been in the past, and yet our per capita traffic fatalities for pedestrians and cyclists have increased, despite the fact that driving dropped in some cases by half. What's happening is that because there's less traffic on the road, we believe people are driving faster. And the faster you drive, the more any traffic fatality, any traffic collision you have with a bicycle or a pedestrian becomes exponentially more dangerous and more deadly. So this is something that I'm committed to continuing to work on, and hopefully will work in partnership with you. And it looks by what's happening on my screen like I'm supposed to stop talking and move to questions. So if that's the case, I'm happy to do that. So Stacy, is that my signal?
Well, it's not controlled by me, Assemblymember. Let's make that clear. But
I'm not blaming anybody here.
No, thank you so much for giving us that recap on last year's bills and then your priorities this year that align with a lot of our cities. So we really appreciate you giving that update. Marcel, I wanted to look to you to see if there were any questions that were submitted that we can ask of the Assemblymember right now, or if we needed to move along.
We don't have any questions, so I'm asking if you have questions, please type them into the chat, and so that way we can, everyone will see the question and we'll be able to ask. But I think in this case, the Assemblywoman covered quite a bit, and she was very thorough in her coverage, so she shocked everybody into a silence, it seems. But I would just have a question actually that just popped up now. So if you want to take it, Stacy, or I can read it.
Sure, yeah. We have a question from our Madam President. How can we support you in your work?
Oh, always Lindsay with the best questions. We will definitely need help. The AB 43, the traffic safety, it's a zero traffic fatalities bill that will give you more control over speed limits and other things in your cities and give you more tools to reduce traffic fatalities. We'll need a lot of help. There are a lot of stakeholders that are opposed to having that flexibility in speed limits. And this is something that's been tried over the years unsuccessfully to change. We think this is a more comprehensive approach because it's going to loop in other things that we know are important, like engineering, like surveys, like dangerous road conditions, particularly vulnerable populations, changes to the roads. So we do think that we have a better chance of getting this through, but we're going to need contract cities and individual cities to get behind this. And I will say that many of your stakeholders were involved. We had law enforcement from across the state of California helping us craft these recommendations. We had all of the walk bike groups involved. We had AAA. We had a lot of stakeholders at the table for the very first time. And they worked for an entire year coming up with a data-driven report on how to reduce traffic fatalities. And our bill is going to be based on those recommendations from many stakeholders in many of your communities. So we will need your help. And if you are interested in this, you can reach out to my office, and when it's appropriate, we will absolutely ask you to start lobbying your own representatives.
That's terrific. Thank you, Assemblymember Friedman. We will look deeper into AB 43. I'm sure it obviously affects all of our cities. So,
and I do want to say one other thing, because I didn't get to my new work on the Transportation Committee, but this is the first time I think that 2 women have chaired transportation, myself in the Assembly and Lena Gonzalez from the Senate. And also 2 women who are moms of young children and representing Southern California, in fact, representing Los Angeles. And a lot of our goals are about sustainability moving forward and making Southern California get the resources that it's often lacked in the past with having Northern California legislators. So all of those goals we have for better mass transit, for more investment in transit infrastructure in Southern California, particularly with trains and buses, and getting people out of their cars and into safer ways of moving around their communities, of getting money into active transportation so that our kids can walk and bike safely to school. Those are my priorities. They're why I moved to the Transportation Committee, and I hope that you all can help support those efforts as well.
Well, thank you, Assemblymember Friedman, for being here, for making sure that women serve in leadership positions in the Assembly, and making sure that Southern California has a seat at the table, which we've long needed. So thank you so much. And on behalf of the association, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone, virtual round of applause for our Assemblymember. Thank you. And I just got a note that our next speaker has arrived. So I will introduce our next very special guest, the Speaker of the California State Assembly, the Honorable Anthony Rendon. Speaker Rendon was elected in 2012 to represent the 63rd District, which includes 9 cities in Southeast Los Angeles. Speaker Rendon became the 70th Speaker of the Assembly on March 7, 2016, ushering in a new era of decentralized speakership and member empowerment. Speaker Rendon has a truly inspiring story. He is the son of working class parents and the grandson of Mexican immigrants. After graduating from high school, the speaker worked for a period of time in warehouses and other manual labor jobs, and those experiences drove him back to pursue a career in higher education. Speaker Rendon attended Cerritos Community College before earning both his bachelor's and master's of arts degrees at Cal State Fullerton. And as a recipient of the National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship, he earned his PhD from UC Riverside and completed postdoctoral work at Boston University. Prior to serving in the Assembly, the speaker was an educator, nonprofit executive director, and an environmental activist. And today we're told that in his spare time, the speaker enjoys spending his days with his wife, their 15-month-old daughter, and hanging out with his best friends, Marcel Rodarte and Jorge Morales. Sorry, Mr. Speaker. You can imagine who drafted these notes.
My goodness.
I know, the eyes roll. Okay. But before I toss it over to you, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to take a moment and recognize you for showing true leadership recently. Some of us saw Assemblymember Wicks take her 1-month-old daughter to the floor to vote because she was not given the opportunity to vote by proxy or remotely. It made national news, and the criticism fell on your shoulders. Instead of defending that decision, you took responsibility. You acknowledged and committed to doing better to promote inclusivity and supporting women in the assembly. And as I'm sure all of us on this Zoom can admit, that we don't always get it right. And it takes true leadership to actually admit that and work towards change. My hat is off to you. And with that, Mr. Speaker, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Stacy. I appreciate that. And that sounded very heartfelt. So I'm sure Marcel and Jorge didn't write that piece. But it's good to see everybody. I'm pretty terrible at Zoom, but I'm kind of going through the folks on here. It looks like Brenda Olmos, Jeff Wood, and Ariel. Jeff and Ariel, both from Lakewood, and Brenda from Paramount, all from the great 63rd Assembly District. Don't tell Laura Friedman, but the 63rd Assembly District is the best Assembly District of the 80 in the state. So a bunch of my council members are on this call, and the various crises, be they COVID, be they a lot of the activities that have happened. There's 500 National Guard behind me outside the window because of all that's happened over the past year or so. I haven't been able to spend as much time as I'd like to in the district. So it's good to see everybody, at least virtually. And I'm happy to be able to talk to you and tell you what we've been working on in Sacramento and what we're going to be working on in Sacramento. I know my staff interacts with you quite a bit, and they let me know what you're working on and what your concerns are. Nevertheless, it's always best to hear things firsthand, the anecdotes, the experiences, the frustrations, the successes. And it's always those conversations, particularly from folks in my district, that help to kind of inform the work that I do up here in Sacramento. I'm live in the city of Lakewood, which is, of course, the initial California's initial contract city. So I'm quite proud of that. And here in Sacramento, we're doing what a lot of you are doing down there in the district, which is to deal with COVID and sort of constantly adjusting our expectations. It's hard to think about this, but to think about it this way. But a year ago, when COVID was a problem elsewhere, we came back a year ago to Sacramento thinking we were going to have about a $10 billion surplus. About 5 months later, we were looking at a potential $45 billion shortfall in our budget. So that, that adjustment in not only in real dollars and the impact it has on programs, but also the sort of psychic impact of that had a tremendous impact on us. And we're constantly trying to adjust our expectations. The budget ended up not being that dire. But it's certainly been an incredible year in terms of adjusting our expectations. So we started addressing the crisis by making sure that the Newsom administration had the funds it needed to fight against the spread of the coronavirus. We took an emergency vote, I believe, on March 17th of last year to make sure that the governor had the money that he needed in order to fight the virus. Well, we also had to change the way we had committee hearings, the way we held session. And Stacy mentioned the incident with Buffy Wicks last year. Our legal counsel told me that if somebody voted remotely, that everything we did would be in danger of being thrown out by the courts. The California Constitution does not allow for remote voting. All we would need would be one person to sue us, and every vote that any member participated in remotely would be thrown out by the courts. So I had to make the difficult decision of telling not only Buffy, but several other members that they wouldn't be able to vote remotely because votes like paid family leave, which we took on that night, would have been thrown out, potentially could have been thrown out by the courts. So we had to very quickly think about how we voted. Time and space restrictions. The building that I'm in now, the Capitol, was closed to visitors. And, you know, one of the sort of beautiful things about being in the building is to be able to see all the school trips, see hundreds and hundreds of school field trips a day coming in and out. And we had to kind of shut those down. There was a point from March 18th of last year until after the 4th of July, when I was the only member in the building. We sent all the members home. I stayed with a skeletal crew in the building. It went from having, according to the CHP, they had about 1,100 people in the building on average a day, every day in January and February, down to about five of us here in between March and July. So it was a very, very lonely place. But this is where we coordinated a lot of the relief efforts from our end. I haven't seen most of my staff in person since last March, since then. So as I said, we had to change expectations rather rapidly. And that's continuing to happen. I mean, just last week, the Sacramento Bee had a story about how critically impacted local hospitals were because of COVID. And on that very same day, the governor was easing restrictions because the region's prognosis was good. So you see those types of things happening sort of all the time. So on all fronts, we faced changes that were changing at every moment. At the same time, we knew that we had to plan for California's future, and that's our job. As far as this year is concerned, I've asked to talk about my legislative priorities, and I have three things that I want to focus on in particular. One of them is broadband access. You know, I've been in the legislature since 2012, and we've always talked about broadband access and how important it is. What was interesting about last year was the conversations around broadband in the Capitol have always been sort of dominated by folks in rural districts. I can think of conversations with Jim Wood, who represents the extreme northwestern part of the state. The Redwoods are in his district, Humboldt County, Eureka, those communities. And Eduardo Garcia, who represents the extreme south. I'm no Magellan, I'm terrible at he represents the extreme southeast of the state, places like Coachella, all the way down to the Mexican border, all the way down to the Arizona border. And the conversations about broadband were always from those communities, from folks who were very cognizant of the fact that their communities didn't have broadband. Last year, when COVID shut down our schools, what we discovered was that there were a lot of pockets. I remember Lorena Gonzalez, who has very urban San Diego in her district. She has the ballpark adjacent to her district. But she said that there were folks in her district week one who said they didn't have broadband access. So we started to see these urban pockets of folks that didn't have broadband access. And it went from being largely a conversation dominated by folks in rural communities to a statewide conversation. And we also saw that internet service is literally a lifeline in California. We saw that in last year's wildfires, when people depended on the absolute latest information about their safety. In many cases, they got that, or in some cases, they failed to get that from online information services. But we all know that the internet is way more than that. As I said, it's education, it's entertainment, it's interpersonal communication, it's business. It's how a lot of us get our jobs. It's how a lot of us get our information. But there are a lot of Californians who don't have good access to broadband because of personal economics or, again, because of geography. We need to change that. And Laura Friedman on the way out talked about, she mentioned Senator Lena Gonzalez from Long Beach. Lena has taken up those efforts on the Assembly side. Cecilia Aguiar-Curry has taken up those efforts on our side. So we're going to work hard to make sure that broadband access is universal. Another thing we're going to be working on this year, and we touched on it a little bit last year, but didn't quite get as far as we wanted to, is police reform, specifically the ongoing refinement of police practices and regulations. I feel like we can't celebrate Dr. King's birthday. It was a birthday that his birthday was yesterday. And we can't really celebrate his birthday and ignore the fact that the rights that he fought for have not been fully realized. And part of that fight was that so everyone could enjoy a sense of personal safety, free from prejudice and free from prejudgment. And we have to work on justice in California so that public safety truly lives up to its name. The third thing we are looking at is kind of a twofold effort. California has always been on a leader on climate change, and President Biden got us back into the Paris Accords yesterday. Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia and I were in Paris when the treaty was negotiated, 4 or 5 years ago. Something that means a lot to us Californians. And when President Trump pulled out of the Paris Accords, we decided to double our efforts here in California. And we want to continue to ramp that up. We need to go beyond just slowing change to actually stopping and reversing the damage that we've been doing. At the same time, we need to be aware of the economic consequences. And in some ways, we've already done that because many of our efforts, particularly on renewable energy and on emissions control, for example, have already spurred the development of new industries, again, with California as a leader in particular. But we want to make sure that the next phase is particularly cognizant of two sectors. We want to look out for people working in industries threatened by climate change protection. We know that they've been collateral damage, and their livelihoods certainly cannot be, their livelihoods are not expendable. It's a complicated but necessary issue. It's also necessary, the second component is it's also necessary for us to watch out for disadvantaged communities. And I have a number of disadvantaged communities that suffer from air pollution in my district. Climate change actions like boosting public transportation, and Laura talked about this, and reducing heat islands and heat island effects, and fostering new industries are super important. But we need to make sure that they get focused on those communities that are often lower income and in immigrant communities like the ones, again, that I represent. So climate change benefit has not been trickling down, doesn't trickle down. We have to build it at all levels. Finally, we're talking about aid for people who have sort of the most to lose. We have to continue to work also on the issue of housing and on the issue of homelessness in California. Part of this is an economic issue. That became very clear when many lost work due to COVID. We saw that they are also in danger of losing their homes if they're evicted because they no longer are able to pay rent. President Biden yesterday issued another executive order relevant to evictions, I think extending evictions on a national level to March 31st, but we're in constant negotiations here in California to address our eviction moratoriums. We know that people need housing regardless of their employment situation. And we've been working on the supply issue for a number of years. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done, particularly with our housing chair, David Chu, in our house. In particular, we've worked to provide housing that allows communities to pursue homelessness, homelessness that fits local needs in particular, but we need to continue to do more. So we know that all of these issues reflect my belief that there are significant things to do in California, significant challenges ahead, and also my belief that we need to really strengthen our social contract. We need to double down on the idea that we're responsible for one another and that we all benefit when we act on that. This is not just something I expect from others. This is something I expect in our own house. And Stacy and Laura both talked about this. When I took over the speakership in March of 2016, we had 11 members who were women. Unfortunately, only 4 of those women chaired committees. Today, I'm proud that I've almost tripled the number of women chairs. We had 4 women chairs in March of 2016. Today, we have 11 women chairs in 2021. I'm proud of that. We've almost tripled the number of women chairs. We only have 17 women in our caucus out of 60, so we can definitely improve on those numbers. And we're trying to do as much as we can to reach out to voters and make sure that more women get elected. Another thing we've done internally that I think reflects our devotion to equity in the Assembly is we've reached full gender parity with respect to pay in our House as a workplace. Women make the same on average that men make, and that's quite unusual in California. That's very unusual in the United States. And we're proud to have achieved that. And we've achieved that. We've increased the pay of women by about 12.5% to reach gender equity over the past 4 years. Same thing with women on the Speaker's Board and Commission appointments. When I became Speaker, I think men were 59% of the Speaker's appointees to board and commissions, state boards and commissions. Only 41% were women. Right now we're at equity. There's a 50-50 breakdown in terms of my appointments to my board and commission appointments. So we're proud of those efforts, but we know that we have to remain vigilant because we've seen sort of a tremendous backsliding in our society in the past, and it's definitely a focus of mine to make sure that we continue to stay vigilant. I've also appointed women to positions like Chief Sergeant at Arms, Chief Clerk, even our chaplain recently was a woman as well. So we're all the appointed positions, all the elected positions are getting closer and closer to achieving equity in this place as a institution, and I'm proud of that. So here we are, 2 decades into the 21st century, and we know there's a lot to do. We know there's a lot to do in California, and I know that I can count on you to continue to be a partner to the California Assembly and the California Legislature. And I'm looking forward to working with you, not only in 2021, but in the years ahead. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for your steadfast leadership, for caring for all Californians, especially those that need our help the most, and of course for rising women up in the state legislature. We really appreciate your commitment to that. Thank you for being with us, and hopefully we can give our speaker a round of applause. Sorry we can't see you in person. Thank you so much for being here.
Take care.
Thank you. And next up, I want to thank our next Assembly member, Sydney Kamlager, for your patience. Thank you for being here with us. Assemblymember Kamlager was elected to the California State Assembly in 2018, but she is by no means a newcomer to politics. Public service is in her blood. At a young age, the Assemblymember helped her grandmother elect the very first African-American mayor of Chicago. Born and raised in Chicago, and you're going to like this, Frank Zerunian, Assemblymember Kamlager moved to Los Angeles to attend USC, fight on, where she earned a bachelor's degree in political science. She later earned her master's degree in arts management and public policy from Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. Prior to serving on the Assembly, she was chair of the LA Community College District, the largest community college district in the nation. Assemblymember Kamlager represents the 54th Assembly District, which encompasses many cities: Baldwin Hills, the Crenshaw Community, Culver City, Ladera Heights, Lemire Park, on and on. There's a lot of cities in your district, Assemblymember. While in the Assembly, she has been a fierce advocate for much needed criminal justice reform and health equity. A couple fun facts about the Assemblymember: her first job was at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem. And she has a hidden talent that I'm just finding out right now. She can play the saxophone. So I feel like you may need to incorporate that soon on your Watch Wednesdays on Twitter. If you're not following her, y'all should, because she's very entertaining. She lives in View Park with her husband, Dove, and her 2 stepchildren, their dog and cat. Let's give a virtual welcome to Assemblymember Kamlager.
Hi.
Hey.
How are you guys? It's so good to see you. I hope everyone can hear me.
We can.
And okay, great. And I am not wearing my earbuds, so if the dog and the cat, if you hear them in the background, oh well. Thank you guys for inviting me. I feel like there's nothing left to say after Speaker Rendon and Assemblymember Friedman spoke, because they shared with you all the juicy information about what's going on. But I will try to fill in and flesh out some of the things that were mentioned. So as Stacy mentioned, who's a super friend, and we had the privilege of going to China together, where she blew everyone away, talking about economic development. I also chair the Los Angeles County delegation, and it's a group of about 38 members. It's bicameral and bipartisan. And we come together on a monthly basis to talk about issues that are important to the region. And you would think that because we are in Sacramento 4 days a week, and because LA is LA, and it's so small, even though it's so big, that we would talk more frequently than we do, but we don't. And so having the delegation is an opportunity for us to come together on a consistent basis and share information and talk about issues that are impacting different portions of the region of Los Angeles, mostly so that we can build better bandwidth when we are fighting for budgetary and legislative policies that impact Los Angeles, and so that we are all on the same page. When bills come up, not everyone is receiving the same information about the impact that a particular bill may have on the state or on certain industries or even on certain regions. And so a good way to create synergy and to leverage is to meet. And we focus mostly on infrastructure related issues, but it's also an opportunity for members to elevate the concerns that are coming from their little cities, to make sure that everyone's on the same page, or to, discuss where it makes sense for carve outs or where it makes sense to double down. Last year, our major focus was on housing and homelessness. And in fact, pre-COVID, we actually had a housing summit where we invited the League of Cities and SCAG and United Way, some nonprofit partners, and a number of developers and builders, and all of the legislators to talk about and to learn from and to engage in this discussion around housing and homelessness. Why is this so important? Because if you walk down the street or try to get a cup of coffee or whatever, you're seeing far too many homeless folks on your streets. Because if you are running a little city, you're probably hearing it from your constituents who say, fix this already. And because for many folks, the rent is too damn high and the mortgage is too damn high. So we came together to talk about all of those things and to figure out where we can lend our voice and might to addressing these concerns. The other challenge is that the chair of the Assembly and the Senate housing committees are from the Bay Area. And so oftentimes the kinds of housing bills that we see, this is a biased statement, come from a perspective that is more Bay Area than Los Angeles County or Southern California area. And so it's also an opportunity for us to kind of level out that playing field. we had engaged in a number of good discussions, and then COVID hit and turned most things upside down. But I can tell you that, and so you all saw how the legislative session ended last year. We were not able to get as many bills across the houses and actually to each of the floors because of the constraints. What the speaker didn't mention is because of COVID, we had to shrink our hearings down to one hearing per each committee. And so normally when you are hearing, anywhere from 5 to 30 bills a hearing each week for about 2 months, we had to hear all of those bills in one sitting and then end with enough time to have employees come in and disinfect that committee room so that another hearing could commence. So as a result of that, many bills died. They were never brought up. They were not heard. And because last year was the end of a 2-year session, we had a constitutional deadline to be done by August 31st, 12 o'clock midnight real time. And so that also constrained any abilities to kind of get to the floor, a number of bills that were ready to be presented on the floor, but had to compete with other bills just for the time. So I think many of us may say that while we got a lot of things passed, we ended on a low note. At least the optics looked low because we were not able to get a number of other bills that people wanted to see passed. That includes a number of housing bills. So we are back again at it. The LA County delegation had a policy retreat a couple of months ago. Most of the focus was again on housing. We actually have a number of housing working groups. One that is focused purely on production, one that is focused around, homelessness, and another sort of for the parking lot issues that really pertain to how we can be supportive of folks who are currently in homes and have them, but need to stay in them. Last year we saw an eviction moratorium that we passed. The governor did an executive order. We passed AB 3088. We plan to extend that. I think AB 15 would extend the eviction moratorium. There is a budget request out now to the governor asking for $5 billion in rent and small mom and pop landlord relief. Part of AB 3088 also dealt with folks who are in homes and managing their mortgages and establishing agreements with lending institutions to sort of discourage them from embarking on any kind of, foreclosure notifications, et cetera. And so that's also in the mix. But we also know that the governor last year, as a result of COVID, we approved $500 million for Project Room Key, which turned into Project Home Key. $800 million went out to counties and cities around homelessness prevention. We know that I think a year and a half ago, we actually passed and got signed into law some CEQA streamline acceleration bills for nonprofits and entities that are putting up homeless shelters. But what we know is that more work needs to be done across the entire spectrum. Labor costs are an issue, land costs are an issue, land ownership is an issue if it's owned by private entities or if it's loaned by municipalities, and how those things can play a role in the swiftness with things get built. We know bureaucracy is a challenge, and we know that red tape is a challenge. And we also know that, in all of those, right, there's an issue around local control, but then there's also an issue around what the state can do. And we saw many years ago, the Governor Brown had redevelopment, and then he did away with it. And we know that that was a great stick and carrot probably for cities to accelerate production. And we have to move back there in my mind. And it's a combination of all options sort of being on the table. You know, how we support the construction and transportation of tiny homes, how we figure out who's in the state who can produce those kinds of things so that we're not, you know, saving money by going to some other state that can produce them, but then sort of, you know, spending the money with transportation. We also, so that's something that I'm working on. Stacy popped up, so I think my time is running out, but I will also say focusing on the care crisis that we have in this state is also going to be a priority. You know, education, childcare, healthcare, elder care. We know that 2 million women left the workforce last year because of COVID, because they could not manage the challenges with employment or unemployment, and childcare, not having childcare, and sort of managing schoolwork for their kids. And I don't know about you, but I don't think we are going to be very successful or innovative if we are continuing to lose women out of the workforce at all levels, right? From executive and down below. So we have to do our part by infusing supports to cities, but also to businesses and small businesses, and also look at the infrastructure that the state can redesign and buttress by making sure that we are doing our part to support those necessary components of an infrastructure that makes cities viable and vibrant, that encourages folks to want to move into cities and counties to live, and that encourages businesses to want to plant their flag there. Lastly, you know, I'm also focused on criminal justice, obviously, but healthcare. And we'll be running a couple of bills on healthcare issues. One, to encourage the importation of prescription drugs from Canada to help make sure that our drug prices go down. And the other is around street medicine, because we know that many hospitals and clinics are not able to bill in order to get reimbursed for providing medicine to those folks who are unsheltered and living on the street. And then when our homeless friends and neighbors aren't able to get the healthcare they deserve, we know that we see a ripple effect with regards to challenges that are faced with many of our healthcare and social safety net systems. So I'm going to stop talking now. It's so good to see you. Shout out to some of the mayors that I know and love, like Stacy and Lindsay. I see you, and Alex from Culver City. And please continue to come and talk to us about the challenges that you all have and how we can make sure that we're keeping you all in mind.
Well, thank you, Assemblymember Kamlager. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your priorities. Thank you for being a strong advocate for some really important issues. And for everyone that's watching, you can go back and watch the tape of Assemblymember Kamlager really advocating strongly for local control with SB 1120, which was an issue that we're really trying to work on solutions on the housing crisis that we did not view as a solution. So we really respected your voice and standing up for all of our cities. So thank you for that and for all that you do. Thank you for being here. Round of
applause. Thank you. I got in trouble for that too, so thank you.
Thanks for taking the hits for us. We appreciate it. That takes true leadership. And without further ado, I apologize. We've been blessed to have Assemblymember Cecilia Aguiar-Curry with us. She was elected to the Assembly in November of 2016 to represent the 4th District, which includes most of Napa, Lake, Yolo, Sonoma, Colusa, and Solano counties. I'm going to abridge her introduction, and I'm so sorry, Assemblymember, to do this, but I am going to go to a quick fact that you drive up to 1,200 miles each week to meet with your constituents to convince your urban counterparts, who are mostly men, that rural areas matter and that you are the first female mayor of Winters. These are just such wonderful accomplishments I wanted to share with everybody. And let me please turn the floor over to you.
Hi, Dr. Strayer. How are you?
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all in one way or the other. The pandemic has sure changed the way how we do business. First of all, I want to say I miss you not coming into my office. I always have enjoyed seeing everybody and having that idle chit chat. and building relationships. And quite frankly, that's probably the most important thing as you're visiting with Laura and Sydney and the speaker, is having these relationships. And this is what this job is all about. And I think before I get started, I'd like to introduce, we have Angela Mapp on the call as well. She is the head consultant for the local government committee, of which I chair. And she'll put her information out on the chat so that if any of you have questions or you see any policy coming through or questions along the way during this next year, please let us know. Pros, cons, do you support, not support, whatever. We would really like to hear your input. You know, we will say it's an understatement to tell you how difficult last year was. And I think you've heard that from Sydney and probably Laura as well. We had to do, the way we did business was different. And I have a policy in a local government committee, is that I work really hard to help all my members get their bills through my committee. Let's see, like last year, we only heard 29 measures in just 4 bill hearings versus 108 measures in 10 bill hearings in 2019. What does that say? That says we had to be very thoughtful and mindful about what we wanted to go forward. We also had to take information from the governor's office as well as the speaker in the Senate of what was going to be important policy to get through. You know, this year will still be constrained. We, as a legislator in the Assembly, we are allowed to introduce, you know, as many bills probably as we want, but you only can take 12 bills over to the Senate. That tells you got to take time. You got to make sure your policy works. I have a rule, and I ask my colleagues that bring bills to the local government committee, what's the problem? How do you fix it? And most importantly, how do you implement it? And that is probably the thing that people don't realize when they bring the bills forward. And when I ask that question, if there's crickets, as I say, I want to say, well, I really want you to think this through, because you just don't throw policy out there just to be doing policy. And I have a big heart for local government. I was a mayor of a very small town. And I always would sit at the dais thinking, who is making up these rules? One size does not fit all. So just for example, this year, you know, housing will be a big issue in 2021. And we'll see the Senate is going to reintroduce their housing package. And my committee heard some of the bills last year, and we expect to see some of those again this year. And we'll hear more bills as leadership renews double referrals. So we're going to see these bills more often. And as Sydney pointed out, is that many of the bills we only saw one time, which is not, I don't think, fair to you or to myself, is that we're not getting enough input, and we need to be challenged on if the legislation is good. So again, we will be having double referrals. Things that we found that's probably going to come up, and I'm going to throw these out at you. We've been faced with allowing housing development on commercially zoned land. It continues to hold a lot of interest with our colleagues, especially with the recent Turner Center report on the issue. So if you go out, you can look at the Google the Turner report, and you can see what they have thought. And it's data that's a little bit old, but it's worth looking at. Impact fees. We know that impact fees are going to come up again, and we've already had one bill referred to the committee. Again, I really like you to all take a good look at that one. We also expect some proposals to amend the Brown Act. This issue comes up periodically. It has a different look each year, but since we've had social distancing requirements on conducting public meetings, we are going to have to address this. So we'll have to see what kind of steps we might take and where this is all going to land. And, you know, wildfires remain a top priority of the legislature. And of course, my district. I have been in this district 5 years, and for 5 years, we've had solid fires. Every single part of my county, every county had a fire at one time. So while my committee does not hear a great many of the fire bills, we did approve Senator Hannah-Beth Jackson's bill, SB 182 last year, and I co-authored that one, but it was vetoed by the governor. So we need to have a better open communication with our governor, as well as the Senate and the Assembly, so that we can get these bills through. I believe Senator McGuire will be resetting the wildfire bill, and that's SB 12. So any of you that are interested in wildfires and communities, please take a look at that. And then I'm really sensitive as the chair of local government to the impacts legislation generates in Sacramento, that how does it affect our local government entities across the state? From being from a small town, I always say, what are the unintended consequences of a community by our legislation? How does it affect them? Does it meet the goals of what the bill is? One size does not fit all. And those are questions I ask of my colleagues as they come in and present their bill to me prior to going to committee. I and my team, we ask those tough questions. And I want to assure you that if you could take the time periodically is to look at the local government bills that are coming up and maybe divvy them up to see how they affect contract cities, would greatly appreciate that, because I need to make sure the policy is good and that we can implement what we say we're going to do. We need to also assure that the additional burdens of local governments and make sure that we don't add to your burden right now. We have a long way for recovery for our cities, and I expect to view many bills through the lens of how are they going to do that? What is the effect on their staff? It goes back to implementation. So I just want to make sure that you're not yelling and screaming at me at the end of the year saying, how did Cecilia let that bill get through? Well, I need your help. Okay, so please do that. Also, I need you to help us as much as you can to be a partner with us and to communicate with me as much as possible and my staff. And as you guys put your policies together, is to have a broad grouping of policies and platforms, especially on some of the most controversial and significant issues such as housing. The earlier we hear from you, the better. I have colleagues that have tried to give me a bill right at the last minute, and I will tell you that I'm very fussy about it. I really I get on the defensive because we have plenty of time to have these really difficult conversations, and by trying to slam a bill through, as I will say, does not bode well on my local government committee, my consultants, or the legislature as a whole. So if you have any ideas for bills, the sooner that we hear them, the better. If you have any concerns about bills, and please keep your eye on them, because as we know, we amend them along the way, and all of a sudden the amendment's not there, and all of a sudden it's there, and you go, well, that really affects my community. So please take a look at that. And then I'd love to have some support from all of you. I am adamant that there should be internet for all. And I need the cities and counties and all local government, tribal, to step up and help us out. We have AB 14, and I think the pandemic has really brought up the inequities throughout the state of California on internet. We have, as many of you probably have in your urban areas, pockets of areas that don't have internet, or they have minimal internet and the connectivity is poor. What we're doing with this bill, it's a grant funding so that you as a local government, a county, can go after the funding and do broadband in your area, in your community. And I think it's a great opportunity for all of you to take a look at it. And if you were to implement it, what would you do? Do you need to change ordinances? If you were to go after these pots of money from the state and the federal, how would you implement internet in your community? Do you want to fund it? Do you want to help with the grants? Is there a way to streamline the process? So as much as this internet bill is really important and we all want it, ultimately it comes back to you as communities to actually implement the product, okay? So take some time, look at AB 14, take some time and look at what the federal government's going to do. Our new President Biden, has really focused, as well as Governor Newsom, on the importance of internet for all, whether it's for telehealth, our school children, economic development. We need to get it in our communities, and no one should be left behind. So AB 14, I would love to have all of your support, letters to come out. I think this is a win-win for every single one of us, but again, it's an infrastructure project, so we have to look at that. And then speaking of infrastructure, I'm bringing back my constitutional amendment to lower the vote threshold from 2/3 to 55%. and that's for voter-approved tax and bond initiatives for infrastructure projects. I know in my smaller communities, they always are wary of money going to the government and to the state. Rightfully so, I understand their concern. But if they know that they can do a project in their local community and that they would watch where their money went to, and the Constitution Amendment has accountability and transparency built into the bill, the people will vote for those kinds of bonds and initiatives. So again, that will be Assembly Constitutional Amendment, and it's going to be out there. So just to keep an eye on that as well. But as we all see that our economy, we need it to grow. And so many of our areas are living in substandard internet, substandard areas. We need to help the entire state. So I hope you'll want to be a partner with us. I hope you will feel free to call my office, whether it is about local government or if it's about internet or infrastructure projects. I'm all ears. There's so many good things that we're going to continue to move forward. Last year was difficult, and no, we didn't get through what we should have. And it really had a lot to do with just having a communication with our colleagues, a communication with all of you and our partners and our lobbyists, all of you at the table. That didn't happen. And this year I feel like that we have passed some major milestones and we can only get better. So I really want to appreciate your time today. I appreciate you asking me to speak. My door is always open, as well as local government. And I believe she sent out, Angela, did you post your, anyway, Angela, I think she's going to put in the chat her contact information. So Stacy, thank you so much for including me today.
Thank you, Assembly members, so much. Virtual round of applause for you.
Thank you.
We will absolutely take a look at AB 14 and whether or not we can support that as an association and certainly our individual cities, and look at your constitutional amendment for infrastructure. But more than anything, thank you for your commitment for wanting to hear our individual voices as cities and really having that open door policy. Look forward to meeting with you in person when this pandemic allows us to do that. But thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome. And please, I'm serious. Keep an eye on the bills that are going through local government. We need to have your input. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Thank you for continuing to stay here with us in this meeting. I wanted to throw this over to Marcel. There he is.
Thank you. Thanks, Stacy. I just want to be real quick. I just want to remind you, normally we were going to do one of our associate member commercials here, but I know everybody's going to start dropping off here in a couple seconds. So we're going to do 2 next month for, I know, so a couple of our associate members are on. So we're going to show 2 next week. I want to remind everyone, for all things legislation, if you have any concerns or if you want us to look at a bill or if you want us to research a bill or your city is doing an individual bill, Jorge Morales is now our new legislative consultant. So he's going to put his contact information, he did already, in the chat. So please reach out to him. His email is jorge@contractcities.org. And just let him know, let me know, and we'll make sure that we follow up. AB 14, of course, is a bill that we're going to look at. So with that, back to you, Stacy.
Thank you, Marcel. And again, thank you everyone for being with us today. I think we had an action-packed schedule with some really fantastic assembly members and the speaker. We look forward to seeing you all again in next week on January 28th. We've confirmed Senator Portantino to be with us, he is always so interesting. So please join us next week, same time, and we hope you all are well. Thank you.
Good job.